Let's talk about you a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit about the history, and we'll kind of do the Cliff Notes version because I know, like you tend to kind of get sidetracked as well. I do that often on this show, and I usually have 15 or 20 questions lined up and usually only get through about 3 or 4 of them. That being said, growing up in Alabama, we'll just skip the whole childhood stuff. Obviously a huge fan of the business, but you get involved in the mortgage business and make a good amount of money, and you kind of push yourself into the business a little bit. And I think it started with an ECW documentary with Shane Douglas. And is that kind of how it all kind of got rolling as far as kind of working with talent and kind of getting to know these guys?
I mean, I guess working with talent was really when, Ric Flair asked me to do his podcast. I mean, that was
I thought it was before that. I thought the ECW stuff was before that. Am I off on the timeline?
No, you're not. But I mean, I made a donation to Kickstarter. I mean, that was
I understand.
That was it. My sort of major collecting fandom started at the end of 2012 when I bought a Ric Flair robe. And then in early 2013, I was able to land the big gold belt and was having a lot of fun. And somewhere in there, I saw they were doing a Kickstarter for an ECW documentary. And I love ECW. It's my absolute favorite. You see the old ECW arena sign behind me there. So
I do indeed.
I made a big donation. And one of the perks was they would screen the movie at your house with an ECW alumni. I thought that's the coolest thing ever. So I invited like a dozen of my buddies over and we watched the documentary with Shane Douglas and had a steak and had some beers and told some old stories, and it was fantastic. And I guess it became sort of my low-key introduction to interviewing wrestlers. And I didn't know that at the time, but eventually when I started doing Rick's podcast, that came in handy, I suppose, because I have zero broadcast experience, never went to school for any of this. Nobody ever gave me any pointers and said, here's how you do it. I just sort of self-taught and worked real hard and tried real hard, and effort counts. Effort matters.
No, it definitely does. And having the schooling is one thing, but it's real world experience and just doing it. And you just by chance, by hook, by crook, you have a very calming voice. And I don't know if that's because I listen to you often and I've listened to the shows for a long time, but it's just a very comfortable voice. And I think that's a big part of podcasting. I think some of the best hosts out there have that very comforting voice, and it's so very conversational and it just kind of rolls off the tongue. Is that something that you feel like you had early on, like with the Woo Nation show with Ric Flair, or do you feel like it's just kind of something that's come over time?
Well, I mean, I got more comfortable as you do it, of course, with anything else, but I mean, I had been in sales my whole life, so I was really comfortable, pitching, so to speak, and talking to strangers. And that wasn't really something I was uncomfortable with. And it wasn't uncomfortable sort of putting myself out there. I'd advertised my mortgage company on local TV and radio for years and years and years at that point. So I was really comfortable on a microphone or in front of a camera or whatever. And there were no jitters of, what if I look stupid? I just learned who cares? You'll get over it. You'll live. It's not going to be painful.
Well, and it's not about you most of the time anyway. If you're interviewing somebody, they don't care what you're saying or what you look like, etc. You're right.
I made the analogy that in this situation, if my business were a strip club, I would be the pole. Like nobody's here to see me. Nobody's here. They didn't come here for me. They came here for them. And it's my job to just, do my job. So that's the deal. I'm doing my job. And to my surprise, people dig sort of my interview style and the research and the format that we came up with. So it's really just been rinse, lather, repeat, if I'm honest. Once we did the Woo Nation thing, I got to just learn. And then I started my own Ric Flair show, and I got to format it. And I knew I wanted to accentuate the positives, hide the negatives, the old Paul Heymanism. And we formatted it like a real radio show. And when I had the luxury of meeting and hanging out and working with Bruce Pritchard at the mortgage company, he's such a great storyteller that I thought, man, this is a show. Let's abandon the interview format and let's just do a deep dive on one topic and just set you up to tell stories. And I'll just ask fan questions. And I thought I was qualified to do that. I'm a wrestling fan. I'm the target audience. So I think that was the dynamic that really made a difference. All the other wrestler podcasts at the time were just the veteran in the wrestling game talking and interviewing other wrestlers. But when you inserted a fan in there who was well-researched and wasn't afraid to challenge the talent, it was a hit, and something to wrestle was off to the races.
Did you feel like, and look, boom, sidetrack, just like that. Do you feel like, you were like somewhat of a historian before you got into that? Or was it when you started doing the deep dives, doing all the research, event by event, year by year, going through all these observers, et cetera, that you feel like you picked that knowledge up? Or did you already have that? Was that something you can kind of lay claim to early on?
I wasn't then, and I'm not now a historian. I'm just a fan. And I know that sounds cliche, but I mean, the reality is I have access to the same things
Yeah,
everybody else does. You know, I mean,
I get it. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
read a lot of wrestling books. I watch a lot of shoot interviews. I subscribe to the Observer. I subscribe to the Torch. I read Mike Johnson stuff and Sean Ross Sapp. So I'm doing what everybody else is doing. I'm just willing to put in the time to copy paste it all together and then format it. So every show I've done, I don't know, since maybe the 5th or 6th, whenever the Vader and Pillman shows were, I've got tons of notes for every single show before we click record. I mean, in some cases, I'd have 70 pages. We just did Jim Ross yesterday morning. I had 14 pages. I hope to do Bruce Pritchard later tonight. I've got 17 pages. I'm ready. So I'm researched. I'm organized. I've got my notes. And I think that's really one of the other differences in our show is the real work, and you know this, happens before you click record.
For
Once
sure.
you click record, now you're just having fun. But it's the research and the formatting and the promotion that's really going to make your show successful. And none of that involves actually talking into a microphone.
Yeah, working with a guy like JR, which I know he's a notes guy, and does a lot of prep. He has to appreciate that. That has to be something that him, just knowing who he is and how he operates, he has to appreciate all the notes you put in to a show.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody I work with looks forward to getting the notes, and it works to sort of jog their memory. And if I'm just hitting them cold, and sometimes they do enjoy that. Like if we're watching a show, Eric Bischoff won't want to look at the note, won't have his own opinion and not necessarily be influenced. And I like that. But if it's a bio show, then he needs the notes and he wants to dig into it and sort of jog his memory, and then he'll make his own notes. So we do it all through Google Docs. So if they want to log in and make their own notes, they can. Not everybody does that, but occasionally they will. And that's been a formula that works for us.
So you do the Woo Nation thing, and you're working with Ric Flair, and you shot right to the top. It's not like you started off working out with Mark Marrow and doing a podcast with Duke Drosy. You went straight to Ric Flair, which is awesome. I kind of need to know how that came about. I mean, that it was so accessible to get in front of Rick and to be able to get him on board for this podcast thing.
I didn't pitch him. He pitched me. We were together in Nashville hanging out. He did this like waiting for wishes deal where you have like a celebrity waiter. And so since it's 2 hours up the road, he said, "Hey, do you want to come hang out?" I said, "Absolutely." So I actually got sick that night and wasn't able to really hang out. I had like the worst headache ever. Like I thought I was going to die. So I went and laid down in the hotel. And then the next morning, he's got to head back. So we met downstairs and had a drink. And he said, "Hey man, what do you know about podcasting?" I said, "Well, I mean, I know what it is." And he says, "How do you get it? How do you listen to it? Can you make money with that?" And I'm like, "Where's all this coming from?" And he explained that his agent had an offer from CBS for him to do a podcast. So he asked my opinion on it, and we talked about it. And eventually he called me like a month later and said, "Hey kid, I'm in the podcasting business." And that was it. So fast forward a few weeks later, and he said, "Hey, would you come in for the first show and just ask fan questions?" I said, "Sure. Yeah, that'd be great." And he said, "Well, you just know a lot about my career, and I know you're comfortable being on the radio through the mortgage deal. If you would just ask fan questions, that would make me more comfortable." And I'm like, "What aren't you comfortable with?" And he said, "Well, it's just, I won't have anybody to really play off of. Just me and the microphone feels weird." And the idea that the greatest interview of all time wasn't comfortable with that, but he always wanted to interact with someone, mean by God Gene and all this. So he needs to bounce it off of somebody. So I got it. So I said, "Sure." So I had this whole career like in an hour-long format and a bunch of notes. And when I showed up with the notes and I was prepared, the producer for CBS was like, "Who did this?" And I said, "I did." And he's like, "Dude, this is like really professional. Can you do this next week when we have Harley Race or whoever it was?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I became an accidental podcaster. It wasn't ever the plan to be a co-host or be involved in the show, but he dug it and CBS dug it. So I became an accidental podcaster, but this was never the plan. I didn't pitch Rick. I didn't have an idea that this would be fun or lucrative, any of that.
Yeah. And it's funny because, a lot of guys, I'm sure, have seen your success and thought, I need to do that too. And there was even times when I thought the same thing, when I was like, and I think I may have even messaged you about it. And I was like, somebody should do Scott Steiner. And I'm like, oh, and then you're like, well, dude, if you get Scott Steiner, to commit to something, then congratulations. But you just think, the wilder, the better. Yeah. Is this going to be, but that's not what yours is. It's not that. It's more, you can count on these guys every time they have a good outlook. It's going to be interesting, but it's not that wild, crazy personality. It's somebody that was there and has the stories. And that's what people really